Welcome to Ecologic for the month of August. Nice rainy day today. Hopefully, it's mostly drizzle and not going to cause any issues as far as high water. We're fortunate to have with us Kiera Frey, who is a volunteer with the Vermilion Preservation Association, who's going into, I guess, the sixth sixth annual symposium. So Kiera should kind of share with us the mission of Bayou Vermilion Preservation and what we're doing with the symposium, where it's going to be and what other issues we're talking about.
Sure thing, Harold. So the Bayou Vermilion Preservation Association is BVPA for short. I'm not going to say it every time. And it's a local nonprofit organization that's, I guess, mission is to educate the public on water quality issues with the Vermilion River in the area and, engage the community through public outreach. So one of the things that we do, it's our biggest fundraiser and membership drive of the year, is the annual symposium. This year is the sixth annual symposium, and the theme this year is Rediscover the Vermilion, expanding the economic and cultural resources of our river. The theme is basically trying to highlight how strategic development around our river can improve our quality of life while also protecting natural resources in our community. It's going to be on Friday, September 13th, 2019 at Vermilionville. It's from 8 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. This event includes a day of speakers. We're going to start at 7:30 with a light breakfast of biscuits and coffee, and then we'll get it kicked off. We've got a lot of interesting folks that are going to be discussing things. We've got a panel discussion planned for the afternoon. Our keynote speaker this year is Billy Nungesser from Louisiana Culture and Tourism. We've got Chef Pat Mold is our, I'm going to use my phone to cheat on this on the schedule, so please forgive me. So he's our honorary chairman, and he'll set the scene for the program, and which kicks off again at 8 a.m. And we've got a good treat this year. We'll have a history presentation from Dr. Michael Martin, the UL professor of history, and he's also the president of the Vermilion Living History Museum Foundation. And he'll give a presentation on the history of Lafayette and the Vermilion River, and that'll include some insights on why our downtown wasn't built on the river, and some historical points that people can look at on the river, Native American locations, that kind of thing, and why we use the river the way we do, why there are businesses and homes along the river. So that'll be an interesting topic. Then we're going to go into looking at some current situations on the river versus some future visions for it. We're going to look at, from an anthropogenic focus on existing resources. We'll have Greg Guidros with Bayou Vermilion District, or BVD, out there talking about things that they do on the river. I know that he's got a great program right now in conjunction with Lafayette Travel, the Vermilion Voyage, that 3-day paddle trip that they do. And he'll be talking about different access points and current existing resources that BVD has for the Vermilion River. And then we have Kathy Gilbert with Plan Lafayette. She's with Lafayette Consolidated Government's Planning Division, and she'll be giving a presentation on the Plan Lafayette, and those are actual citizens' visions for the river that were done a long time ago, so we'll get a chance to look back at that. We'll talk from an ecological standpoint about tourism and natural resources. We have Eric Johnson with the Audubon Society giving a presentation, and then we also have Scott Schilling, who does a lot of stuff around Lafayette, and he'll be giving a presentation on outdoor sporting events and other ecotourism interests. So then we'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll do some looking at how other places have done it. There's a lot of river revitalization projects going on out there, and we've got a real treat this year. We've got Kristen Veldhouse with HDR Foundation coming down from Omaha, Nebraska, where they've done a lot of projects and of revitalization on the Missouri River, which is really close to their downtown. So we'll see how there were successes in other places. And after that, we've got Acadiana Planning Commission. We'll have Chad Lacombe talking about redevelopment on some of the existing properties that are out there. We'll break for lunch. It's going to be a delicious lunch at Vermilionville. And then we'll have a panel discussion, which I'm really excited about. We've got a lot of community organizers come together for this. It's going to be moderated by Scott Brazda, and we've got developers, we've got eco-tourism businesses. I think Pack and Paddle will be there. We've got city planners that'll be on the panel discussion. We've got Kenneth Boudreau, an elected official. He'll be out there. And I think we'll also have the Tesh Project there, one of our partners in preservation that we do work with very closely. So that's a summary of the day. We're having it end at 1:30, so as not to drag on too long. But the tickets can be found online at Bayou Vermilion Preservation Association.org. The registration for the event is $27, which includes the light breakfast, lunch, and your membership to Bayou Vermilion Preservation Association. Student fee is only $5 with an ID, so that's definitely a bonus right there. And I know I did a lot of talking, but if you have any questions.
So we got kind of a light breakfast and lunch and the whole symposium and membership
Exactly.
for $27. Well,
Mhm.
that's great. That's real good. And these have been great successes over the past. It kind of highlights and gives us focus on the Vermilion, and there's a lot of people looking at it as an issue of flood control, but this is an issue entirely different. It looks at the beauty of the bayou and how we can use it as an asset. It's kind of interesting that if you look at the Bayou Teche or Bayou Lafourche, both of those waterways have roads on each side almost for their entire length. And we hardly have no roads on the Vermilion, and it's kind of interesting why we never built roads along the Vermilion.
Right, exactly. And then the access points we do have. So we're interested in hearing from people, especially during the panel discussion, about what they want to see from the Vermilion. If we did restore it and revitalize it, what kind of projects are they interested in seeing? So more access points, more recreation. Do we want roads along them, or do we want bike trails?
Look at the opportunity for a bike trail. You could go from the airport. Now this has been proposed, and go up the bayou, and you got to deal with several bridges, but you could go up the bayou and then up the Ruth Canal up to the Bayou Teche with a bike trail. And Ruth Canal is all public property, and I think that the Nature Conservancy is owner of a bunch of that property, so they would be, I think, very willing to host a bike trail through there. And how neat that would be to take a bike trail to, for instance, Lake Martin from Lafayette through a wilderness. Just a wilderness trail, where, going to the wilderness, you get to observe nature, without the distraction of cars and highways, and the noise of cars and highways, and as you get away from the airport, you get to a real silent area, and a beautiful area along the bayou. The Cypress Island Swamp is very much a retention zone of the Vermilion Bayou, and that's a magnificent area, and it's the remnant of the river 60,000 years ago. The river came, the westernmost tract of the Mississippi is the Bayou Vermilion, and as it came down in this region, it left two big oxbows behind. One is Cypress Island, and two is the big woods below Abbeville. And that was rediscovered, so to speak, as a result of an LSU geological survey that occurred in 1949. And I have a copy of it. It's rather interesting. And the bayou went through its present course to Vermilion Bay, and then went south through towards Belle Isle, crossed the Little Bay, and go to South Pass, and then somewhat came out right at Freshwater Bayou. And they trekked it all the way across the continental shelf, since this trek that the Vermilion occupied as the Mississippi was 3 ice ages back, and the shore of the Gulf was 200 miles further south. So they trekked it all the way across that region, and it's interesting, this was actual borings to monitor the bed of the river that whole distance. So a real interesting study done in 1949. And so lots of folks not aware that the westernmost trek of the Mississippi was the Vermilion, many thousands of years ago.
That's why my vegetable garden loves that soil. It's
Yes.
that old Mississippi River.
And the archaeological sites are extensive along the Vermilion, especially as you come up from the south end of it. And when I was a real youngster in the 40s, there were 3 pyramid mounds where the Vermilion Bayou came into Little Vermilion Bay. And they were about, the biggest one was about 30 feet up. And you had 2 smaller ones, but they had a flat top. And they were all white clam shells. They had no vegetation, whatever. So it was kind of fun to climb and play up on the top. And you get 30 feet up above the marsh country, you're really on top of the world. And in about 1949, they would dredge it up. In fact, the LSU team that was doing the survey came upon the destruction of those archaeological sites and treasures and dedicated a page of their report to blasting the state of Louisiana for allowing that to happen. It wasn't at all a part of the study, but I guess the authors of the study felt so, angry and hostile towards that whole thing. They dedicated a page of their report to that, act of destruction of history.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a bunch of other sites where the Vermilion Historic Coastal is a site that myself and 2 archaeologists spent all day. We found some very interesting things. Pottery, the oldest pottery, which goes back 3,800 years, and the newest pottery. The old pottery was as thick as your thumb, and they couldn't figure out how to keep the pots from leaking, so they made big, thick, heavy pots. And as the technology got better, they realized in the last 300 or 400 years of making pottery that if they crush shells, clam shells, into the clay, they could make a thinner, lighter, waterproof pot. So the latest ones, you look at them closely, have these little bitty flecks. And it's kind of interesting to work with those guys. They have soil manuals, and they look color-coded. And you have all these different colors of soil that identifies where it comes from. And next to the color is a hole. So you could take a piece of pottery and clean it real well and stick it in a hole and know where it came from. So really interesting to work with these guys and say, well, you got this orange pottery, and that didn't come from here at all. We have gray pottery. Here, our clays are gray. And so then we found a fishing string, apparently, that was about 10 strands, rather strong. We found about 30 feet of it, all in the shells. And it was a natural material, but we couldn't figure out what it was. And that was sent to LSU to try to discover what it was.
And where did y'all find it?
This was at the Indian Mound where the Bayou Vermilion, it's on the Vermilion, where it hits the intercoastal.
Okay.
And we had 3 very prominent mounds right here in Lafayette. One is where the end of the runway is now. They took out 2 mounds to build the runway. And then the biggest mound was across the bayou from where Oakhorn Country Club is. And that mound was apparently a burial mound. On this program, about 5 or 6 years ago, we were talking about the Vermilion with the director, Jason Dupuy at the time, was the director of the Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District. And we were talking about these mounds right at the airport, and a guy from Kiera Frey called in and said, I was driving the bulldozer that pushed that mound down, and he said it didn't take long to realize that this was a burial mound because we were pushing the bones and the skulls in front. And he said it was such an experience, he said, that I knew we shouldn't have been doing it. And when we discovered the bones, we should have left it alone. And it was like pushing my bulldozer through the graveyard at Kiera Frey. And so, of course, he wasn't the guy making the decision. So this history, the Takapaw had as their boundary, their eastern boundary was the Vermilion. And they used the Vermilion to go way up the country. And they would come up the Vermilion, up to the Tesh. And the Tesh eventually ended up at Bayou Caron by Washington, historically, way back. And then they could get into the Catawba and up Bayou Buff and get all the way to the Red River through Bayou Buff and go way up the country. And the Indians, the Takapaw, some of them stayed here all the time, but some of them would go back with the geese all the way to the mountains, so, as I understand it. So, anyway, the Vermilion is very much a part of that. So it's this very rich archaeological history. You can go up the bayou during low water and find pottery all along by the airport. And so, and the parts of the Vermilion, as you go south, has just beautiful shorelines through the Palmetto Island State Park. That area is just gorgeous, really pretty.
And that's one of the things we're talking about, rediscovering and revisiting the Vermilion River and getting out there, not just for the archaeological aspects of it, but there's a ecological aspect that a lot of people forget, that river's in our backyard. And a lot of businesses, put their business right up on the river and don't treat it as an economic resource to say, hey, look, I've got riverfront property. So that's definitely something we want to take a look at.
And I guess riverfront property is very popular in Lafayette. It's, I guess, some of the nicest, biggest homes are along the Vermilion. And of course, it was a very important aspect of trade, when before highways were built, and Lafayette was fortunate it had a railroad. But think of Lafayette, we have a navigable waterway all the way to the General Bouton Bridge, which is right downtown Lafayette. We have excellent rail connections. Then we have the two major interstates coming together right in Lafayette, and we have a wonderful airport. So all these modes of transportation come in, all in very close proximity to the Vermilion. I-10 crosses the Vermilion, because I-49 goes right along it. So there has to be economic opportunity with this abundance of, travel, modes, the airport, the railroad, all of this comes right into Lafayette. So y'all can share with me some of the thoughts y'all have on how we could improve the bayou. There's a big effort to plant trees, a big effort to, I guess, plant things like irises and other plants that would beautify the bayou.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of what we call partners in preservation, and that's the Acadiana Native Plant Society, lots of the Master Gardeners, Project Front Yard, all of those. We work with them closely for bank stabilization workshops where we go out and do plantings. but any aspect that we can to get out there and do projects that will help preserve the natural resources of the Vermilion Bayou. We also would like to see more access points. You know, actually kayaking or boating on the Vermilion can get people more connected with the river and back.
You have a call.
Oh, we already got a call.
You on there? Can we help you?
Yes. Hey, Kiera and Harold, thanks for talking about our symposium coming up. And wait, let me see if I can get my television turned down. Okay, I wanted to say that we are about planting trees and reestablishing and revitalizing the bank lines, where we're hopefully doing demonstration gardens showing other people how to do this all along the bayou side. These are the plants you use, the trees you use, and that's just a real exciting time in the Bayou Vermilion Preservation Association now that we've begun doing all of this with our partners in preservation. And I think we start with our first one coming up in November, and it'll be over at the Nature Station, the Acadiana Nature Station, where we'll be preserving some new. Well, they've put a bridge across a coulee there, and doing that, they took out all the trees and everything, and so it's sort of starting to erode, and so we're going to go in there and work on that, and it'll be a demonstration project for places like this all over. So, yeah, we are working, and we are excited and hope that people will come out to this symposium, find out how they can be a part of it as well, too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And
Thanks,
what kind of trees would y'all recommend to plant? I think she hung up on, one of the things that, easy trees to plant are both the cypress and willow. And they both can start just from little branches. You can just cut, 2 or 3 foot slivers and stick them in the mud, and they're going to grow quite well. Both cypress and willows do that. So you don't have to plant a cypress from seed, and so lots of opportunities to enhance the trees along the waterway. And one of the things we do in scouting, and I know your husband is involved in scouting, his son's a Boy Scout also. When we're camping during the fall, we always bring a bag of acorns with us, and often we're along the waterways, so we bring a bag of acorns, and we don't bring any acorns back. And so it's pretty easy to plant them. You push the leaves aside, put 3 acorns down, step on them, and then put the leaves back so the squirrels don't eat your seed. And you have an excellent chance of getting trees growing. But just cutting willow sprigs, at this time it's easy, and willows are something grows very fast and stabilizes the banks. And, they're not like a live oak. If you kind of think you got too much of them, you can just chop them down. But so willows do super well, and cypress do also. And of course, you have an issue like with cypress, you're going to get a clone of the tree you cut, and willow too. But that's all right if you preserve it, and the cypress do wonderful because the knees form a great bulkhead that holds the soil together. And they've done that a lot along the Teche, and I've not seen that on the Vermilion, but you can see very extensive plantings along the Teche where people chose to plant cypress rather than bulkhead. And you can see lots of places where the bulkhead is all rotten away and the cypress are doing fabulous in the knees. You have another call, I believe. No.
Well, Sarah gave a plug out to our most recent project that we're all very excited about, and it has to do with these planting workshops and reviving resilient landscapes that are made up of native species of plants that can be a natural corridor for the animals and the insects and our pollinators to move around from place to place. And so we've got a grant from the HDR Foundation, and we're working on a series of urban plantings where we're going to, like she mentioned, at the nature station. And then a bunch of bankline stabilization workshops where y'all can come to these free workshops and get free plants. You can get information for how these native plants would work in your yard. So shout out to the Reviving Resilient Landscape workshops that are definitely coming up, and y'all keep an eye out for more information on that.
And it's very important to point out the importance of native plants. The native trees attract insects and wildlife and squirrels and everything in a much greater, capacity than, say, a tree that is foreign to our area. The native trees are, used to our climate, soil, rainfall conditions, and they prosper and grow, where some of the non-native species like, Chinese Tylenol, they have benefits, but they don't attract wildlife like our native plants do. The cypress eventually hosts a lot of critters. Of course, the oaks, all the different oaks, the live oaks, even the water oaks, grow very quickly and produce a lot of food for ducks and squirrels and deer, you name it. So super important that we promote the native plants, most likely to prosper and most likely to accommodate insects and wildlife critters.
And not only that, like you mentioned, they're accustomed to our soil here, so they're very hardy and more likely to help with improving stormwater management and holding that water on site where you want it, or moving it around. So it's a big component to stormwater management and water quality improvement using natives. And that's something we want to focus on.
And just the idea of planting trees, the trees are the lungs of our earth, and we take them out, and storms take them out. Just even the storm that we just had knocked down some beautiful trees. And, the key here is to constantly replant them. Surprisingly how quickly trees grow. I can look at some of the trees the Boy Scouts planted 15 years ago, and they're big old beautiful trees. They're monstrous trees, how quickly and amazingly they grow. And getting tree seedlings, the trees of Acadiana, Potts trees, most nearly always native trees, and they're given out at Festival Acadien, they're given out at Festival International. I guess some of the other events in town, we're there with trees to give out. And the only cost is a commitment from you to plant it. And of course, they're in pots, so even the biggest procrastinator has a year or two that he can procrastinate and wait to plant these trees. But the ideal time is after a big rain, when your soil is very well saturated, and plant these trees, and they'll get going. And we complain about all the rain going on right now, but sure is helping the dickens out of our trees. The trees are looking wonderful. You can just see a shot in the arm for citrus and for oaks, and you name it. You see fresh foliage and all this rainfall is just making the trees prosper. So we need, if we think about it, it's pretty easy to plant 1 or 2 trees a year. And if we had each person in the community commit to that, we reforest the whole area. And I heard a figure that astounded me that if we planted 1 million acres around the world of reforesting planting, that it would take care of the global warming and the carbon issue. So that's an incentive to get out and plant trees. So anyway, we work in, share again with us the organizations that work with you.
So our partners in preservation, of which we have many, specifically for this Reviving Resilient Landscapes project, definitely we've got Trees Acadiana. We've got Acadiana Native Plant Project. We've got the Tesh Project, Bayou Vermilion District, local soil and water conservation districts. And this is from a grant given to us by the HDR Foundation. So lots of people working
Wow.
together on this, lots of partners.
This grant includes some actual acquisition of trees.
Absolutely, we're going to be planting trees. We're getting them from Trees Acadiana, from Native Plant Project, local areas. We're sourcing them from where we can, locally first, and then we're
And
going
what
to.
species are you acquiring in this?
I'm not the subject matter expert. We're definitely trying to design it per each site, so it's very site specific. So if we're looking at Acadiana Nature Station, for example, I think that, and we're not only doing trees, so there will be some oak there, but we're also doing some more understory shrubs
Smaller trees,
and
yeah.
herbaceous plants. Yes.
Yeah.
So buttonbush, I know, for example, I can't think of the others. Again, I'm not the subject matter expert, and it's very site specific. So there's some design aspect to that. But the workshops will include an opportunity to speak to people that can help you on your own yard and what your yard would need specifically, whether it's for drainage, stormwater management, water quality, trying to get pollinators in, whatever your specific issue is, that would.
Yeah.
Definitely attend those workshops. They're going to be free, so you can, and then you'll have plants that you can actually take home, some starter kits that
Will they
Acadian
be
and
given
Plate
out
Project.
at the symposium? Will there be any of them at the
I
symposium?
don't think we'll have any starter kits ready for the symposium. Most of these plantings are going to take place in the fall and over the winter months where it's better to do plantings. And so September 13th, I don't think we'll have any ready, but maybe, yeah. Show
We
up and
always
find-
have the trees from Trees Acadiana. We had a big volunteer potting effort, so we got a bunch of them, and all this rain has gotten them really looking real good. So we certainly partnered with a lot of other folks, some of the volunteers of the Boy Scouts who actually do a lot of this planting. And we've had extensive tree plantings along the bayou. We had one of them on University, between University and Bayou. We planted about 40 trees, including some citrus, which did not do well. It seemed like they're bouncing back. But a bunch of live oaks and other trees were planted, and they're doing it real well. Live oaks really do superbly well in our area, and just witness the cathedral oak, how long they last, That tree is over 500 years old. And a lot of these trees along the Vermilion are the live oaks. And I guess one of the really scenic aspects of taking a run down the bayou is all the trees that are there from all the way up. It starts in Orneville, and as you come down, a lot of that you're in very forested areas, and around Larrabee Pit and all that area north of Lafayette, and then as you go through the Cypress Island Swamp, those trees along there are just gorgeous and beautiful. A lot of them are big cypress, a lot of big live oaks, and amongst other things, So, and amazingly, the bayou was dredged about 1950, and that spoiled me that it went almost all the way to Orneville with the dredging, and so that's been there so long. The trees have grown on that spoil bank. You on there? Can we help you?
Yes, I'm wondering, I have a property that I've lived on for generations, and I have old seeds that I'd love to find a place to donate, cuttings and old seeds. Do we have like a depository for those products, those plants?
What kind of plants are there, ma'am?
Grandmother's rose bush. I have some irises that have been in the family forever and ever. Fig trees that came from one place to the other through the generations. But I'd love to pass on cuttings, and I'm wondering if we have.
We'd be
someplace
glad
we
to
can
take them.
deposit.
Through Trees Acadiana, we'd be tickled to take them. Especially like those older varieties of figs. They're kind of wonderful. And I personally not have had success with some of the modern LSU figs. You know, they tend to die very easily and don't produce figs. But the old varieties, they just produce figs like crazy. And in fact, I have one tree that does real well, and it's just one of these old varieties that, you know, somebody gave me, and it was just a native fig. You know, it wasn't. So I think trees of Canadiana would love to accommodate you on those things. And you mentioned irises. Are these, what color are they? Are they native Louisiana irises?
I have the yellow flag irises, but I also have some lovely, they're kind of a purple, they're a purple variety. Those were particularly bred by the Louisiana Iris Society that was, people were living here in Lafayette.
Well, there's a native purple iris at Lake Falls Point, and it's just so gorgeous. And these are native, but you know that's the only place I've seen them in a while. And so, yes, we'd love to, because we had an iris planting effort with the Scouts years ago, and you know we probably planted them too close to the bottom of the bayou, so high water comes and keeps them flooded for such a long time, it wipes them out. But I think you could plant irises well up the bank where they wouldn't be flooded out, and their survival would be much improved. So we'd love to accommodate you and propagate some of those native, you mentioned figs, they produce figs well?
Very happy where they are. They produce an overload for the entire neighborhood.
Wow, well, we need them. You see, that's the type that we need, is the ones that really produce. And it's pretty easy to make a cutting. I think there's a way that you can cut off a part of the bark and then wrap it with sphagnum moss, and it'll root into that. Is that the method you use to make cuttings?
It was a long time ago, about 15 years ago, that we took it from my grandmother's house before it was sold, and that's how I ended up with it. And it went through a hard time before I actually got it in the ground, and it survived and it has thrived.
Wow. We'd love to accommodate you through Trees of Acadiana, and we'll put some in pots and share them with whoever wants them.
I'd be delighted.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your input and call. It's all about, you know, enhancing nature. And this is your property along the bayou?
No, sir. And directly downtown.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
But that's good old Cajun soil, I'm sure.
If you want to come to the Trees at Acadiana meeting on Tuesday.
We do have a meeting Tuesday at the old map store. It's right kind of across from the Protestant cemetery on Pinto. Right.
Oh, thank you.
1020 Auburn.
1020 Auburn.
And what time is it again? I'm sorry.
It's at 6, isn't it?
6 o'clock.
Yes, 6 o'clock. We'd welcome you to attend and share your generosity with Trees of Acadiana. We'll help you take care of them.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much for the call.
And thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Very good. Wow. Figs are wonderful to preserve, and we have one tree, and we made about 25 bottles of fig preserves, and they're really delicious.
I've got one of those LSU purple figs, and you're right, it's susceptible to disease a little bit, and it doesn't make a lot of figs.
You're on air. Can we help you?
Hello. I missed the earlier part of the program. Could you talk again about the symposium, and is it open to the public, and is there an admission? And could you tell me a little bit about the symposium on the 13th, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Again, it's on Friday, September 13th. and that's Friday the 13th, so maybe you can remember that. And it's going to be at Vermilionville, and it runs from 8 a.m. until 1:30 p.m., but we're going to check in and have a light breakfast of biscuits and coffee starting at 7:30 a.m. So if you want to get there, and you can buy the tickets online at Bayou Vermilion Preservation Association.org, and they're $27, but that includes your lunch, that light breakfast I mentioned, as well as your membership fee into the BVPA. If you're a student, the fee is only $5 with your student ID. I think I covered everything, but
You might mention some of the key people there. Let me get this phone. You there? Can we help you?
Yes. Okay, Trace Acadiana meets this coming Tuesday, but it's at 5:30, not 6. It's at 5:30.
Okay.
And, y'all were talking the history of the river, and I just think that is fascinating. I talked with Mike Oye a few years back before he left planning, and he talked about Indian mounds over at Paul Bro Elementary School and how neat it would be for them to do some archaeological diggings there and maybe even start a museum. Why don't we have a museum on the Vermilion River that I just think it's an opportunity, and perhaps this symposium will start that ball rolling. Kiera, take it back to our committee.
sounds good.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Absolutely.
And I think the historical aspect is one of the interesting things and we're going to focus on that. We're going to have, again, Dr. Michael Martin. He's a professor of history at UL, and he's going to be speaking about the historical aspects of the Vermilion, why it's not, why our downtown isn't settled on it, why we have businesses and homes on the Vermilion, and probably a little bit about the indigenous peoples and how they used the river. So definitely a big part of our symposium to discuss the historical aspects of it.
Thank you so much. And very important to point out, there's an anchor along Highway 90 at one of the anchoring firms, and I know the history of the anchor. Around these mounds at the end of the Vermilion Bayou was a popular place for local people to trawl for shrimp during the fall especially. And the Moss family who lived at Intracoastal City near the Bowman Lock, they were trawling there and got their trawl hooked on something real heavy. They didn't know what it was. They couldn't get it unhooked. So they dragged the anchor back to their home on the Intracoastal, and they got a winch truck and picked up the anchor. And they threw it on the bank. And that was, I guess, in the middle 50s when that happened, or earlier. And it was, they picked it up when the shell mounds were still there. So that had to be around 47 or 48, right after the war. And they laid it on the bank, and Mrs. Moss opened a restaurant and decided to call it the Anchor Inn. So they hung the anchor up on some nicely painted, they sandblasted the anchor and put it on, and they painted it pretty silver and hung it and called the restaurant the Anchor Inn. And the couple of years after the restaurant was running, couple of historians from New Orleans came to the restaurant for dinner, and they noticed the anchor and got curious about it. So they measured it and took photographs and all, brought it back there from New Orleans. So they brought it back to New Orleans and found out that this was an anchor cast in the Lafitte blacksmith shop on Royal Street. So this was an actual anchor from John Lafitte's ships. And it was found right where the Vermilion Bayou entered the bay, where supposedly John Lafitte and his friends would come and display their wares on the top of the mounds, and the planters would come down and buy from them. So that's the history of that. But that anchor is on Highway 90, prominently displayed on the left, about halfway between Broussard in New Iberia. You want to see it. But that's one of John Lafitte's anchors. So we know for sure that John Lafitte applied the Vermilion.
That's interesting. Yeah, but I'd like to hear people call in with their suggestions for what they'd like to see on the Vermilion, or what they want to see happen with it.
Well, we had a tour boat on the Vermilion years around, I guess, in the 70s. And it operated for about a year and a half, where you could go and take a tour on the bayou. Of course, the Bayou Vermilion District has tours on the bayou, because I see them going by. I don't know how frequently, how often they are offered. They certainly have tours up the bayou. And then I guess the annual paddle event where people paddle down the bayou. I think that's in May or something like that when that happens, all to kind of celebrate the bayou. But access is key. We have one of the landings that currently, the boat landing at Rotary Point is under construction. It won't be completed probably for another year or so. And during high water, you can't put a boat in the water at Beaver Park. It gets flooded out. So we're often without a landing at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so perhaps, we can be thinking about putting a landing that doesn't flood out. And the area across from the, I guess, Beaver Park, that's real high ground. It's presently a park. We certainly need to and should put a landing there, and something that would accommodate canoes and kayaks as well as power boats.
I believe there's a total of 9 access points in Lafayette along the Vermilion River, and BVD can get you access to those. If you go online to BayouVermilionDistrict.org, you can find information on, I think it's 24 hours in advance you can
Yeah,
call
but
them
these are not boat landings.
to get kayaks and stuff from them, and then you can, I think they're all kayak, not boats, you're right, not motor boats, but paddle boats, kayaks, and canoes.
Well, you can put those in anywhere.
Sure.
So, they're kind of lightweight, you can dump them in anywhere.
But BVD will be at the symposium and giving us more information about their current resources and some stuff in the future, that projects that they're working on to give us more access to the river.
And Billy Nutguest, of course, is I guess the Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana is also head of tourism, and he's going to be present. At what time does he speak?
He speaks. He's one of the first to speak. He is the keynote speaker, and he will be speaking, giving his opening remarks around 8:20. So right after we get kicked off.
Wow.
Yeah, and then like I said, we go into the history and the resources.
You on there? Can we help you?
Yes, Harold. I was wondering, with the Vermilion in its present condition, would it even be possible to run a tour boat, from, say, I don't know, General Mouton or somewhere up around there down to Abbeville, or is it too shallow in certain
It's
places?
way too shallow. You bring up a very important point. Yes, it is way too shallow. If you started a tour boat, it probably would have to start from Camellia Boulevard, because powered vessel, an inboard powered vessel could not navigate the river between General Mouton and Camellia Boulevard. It's very shallow. It's very shallow, and it's the bottom is very hard, like compacted sand, and if it's just mud and fluff, a boat can whack their way through that. But with hard sand, the hull itself runs aground, and then there's no motoring through. So you're in low water, and if you ran a tour business, you'd want to run it every day, mostly every day, high water, low water, whatever. But low water would commit that about everything upstream of Camellia Boulevard would be highly suspect with super shallow areas and not navigable at all. And
some of the
that's an
the prettiest
important
areas
point
are
for the
upstream of
opportunity.
those
You
kids.
bring up a very important point that, you could operate canoes and kayaks, but you couldn't operate, say, a tour boat like we did in the 70s. That wouldn't happen at all. A very important point that you bring up. Of course, navigation is very important in terms of economic opportunity. Super important. Why we spent $2 billion to accommodate navigation to Shreveport. Why are we spending $900 million to make sure navigation of ships on the Mississippi can happen? We're spending $60 million to accommodate navigation on the Champlain River. All these rivers can fill in, and it's super important that we have a watchful eye on them, and it's very important that groups like Bayou Vermilion Preservation is one of those watchful eyes to make sure that the Vermilion stays intact and quite usable for economic opportunity. Real good point you
I
bring
think I
up.
remember back in the mid-'80s. I'm not from here. I moved here from Denver in 1985, but I've been here a long time, obviously. But my mother came down from St. Louis, and we took a tour on a boat, and we seemed like we put in right by the Pinhook Bridge.
That's where that's right. That was the tour boat that operated right at the Pinhook Bridge. That couldn't happen anymore.
That was really
It was a
fun.
Vermilion
We had-
Queen.
we had
It was a
good time.
Vermilion. Yeah, it was the Vermilion Queen.
Right. And if you bring people come down here to visit, I mean, it's something a really good way for them to, learn a little bit about the area and see some of the, get a real nice view of all the things along the river and how pretty it is and everything else. And it's kind of a shame that we can't do that anymore. We really ought to try to get that
Right.
back, I think.
I think you're completely right. The Bayou gives you a totally different vantage point of our community. From the Bayou, you see the beautiful homes, you see the beautiful natural areas along the Bayou. It's totally different looking. That's true of the Bayou Teche also, that you go on the Bayou Teche and you see just an extraordinarily different view from one driving down the highway at 40, 50 miles or 60 miles an hour. So, but you're absolutely right. If we're going to keep up the economic opportunity, tourism included, we have to maintain the bayou in a navigable condition. Very important you bring that point up. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. For a very important point, navigation is super important. It's economic opportunity. And you have one of the boat yards that would love to work on larger boats. They could easily be doing a lot more work if the bayou could accommodate larger boats. And then also the people with the rock yards are having, during normal water, they having a real tough time getting the gravel and limestone and all to the facility. And so they have to half load.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot more expensive and a real economic negative issue for the bayou. So it's super important that someone, raise the issue with the Corps that navigation is part of the economic opportunity we have with the bayou.
Yeah, and these are the kind of conversations that we want to be having about what's our vision for the Vermilion, how can we get there, and
Well,
That's what this
navigation has to be a part of it.
that's what this symposium's about, starting those conversations so we can reclaim that river in our backyard.
You bring up public access. That's something else we certainly can improve. There's a lot of areas along the bayou you can't even see it. You can't even get to it. There's no public access, and you would think that we could work. Each bridge has an approach that has public access. Theoretically, you have a bridge might be 50 feet wide, but it might have a 200-foot, public right-of-way through that. So there's an opportunity for canoe launch, for, launching kayaks and so forth. you know, it'd be great just to have an observation deck, a fishing deck every now and then.
I was about to say that, yeah, not just
And there are
watercraft, but
lots,
places.
you know, I had my grandchildren, and they wanted to fish the other day, and I said, well, I dug some worms, and, you know, in about 30 minutes, we caught 5 catfish right off the deck, you know, and so the bayou's full of fish. So anyway, we're at the end. Again, the date of the event,
It is Friday, September 13th, and it's from 8 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. at Vermilionville, and you can get the tickets online at Bayou Vermilion Preservation Association.org.
and the ticket's $27, and it's membership, breakfast, and lunch.
Yeah.
And so a lot of bang for your buck. So, Kiera, thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you so much
We
for
can-
having me.
30 seconds.
We're, you know, working for something very important, an asset. You know, navigable waterway into our community is a vital, very important asset for beauty, for economic development. So thank you for being here to support that.
Thanks.
10 seconds.
I hope to see everybody there.
All right, 13th of September at Bayou Vermilion District, and there'll be a lot of great speakers.